My name is Lawrence Blackwood, and I'm 71 years old. At my wife's funeral, I sat alone. My only son was celebrating his wife's birthday on a yacht. The next day, he came to my house not with condolences, but with a business plan. He wanted his inheritance early. He thought he was dealing with a grieving, senile old man who would sign anything put in front of him. He didn't realize he was dealing with a father who was about to teach him the most expensive lesson of his life. If you believe that family legacy is more than just money, hit like and subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're listening from. The scent of lilies. Amara's favorite was so thick it felt like you could taste it. It clung to the heavy, silent air inside St. James Chapel, a sweet, cloying perfume of farewell. My wife always said she wanted to be sent off in a sea of them, a final, elegant goodbye. I made sure she had it. Hundreds of white blooms stood in silver vases flanking the polished cherrywood casket where the woman I'd spent 50 years of my life with now lay in eternal rest. The soft, mournful notes from the pipe organ drifted through the nearly empty chapel, each note a tear dropping into the profound quiet. I sat in the front pew, my back ramrod straight in my best black suit, which felt less like clothing and more like a strange, ill-fitting suit of armor. The space beside me, where my only son Andre and his wife Brittany were supposed to be, was a cold, cavernous void. It was like a black hole sucking away what little warmth and light remained in my soul. I could feel the stares from the handful of old friends and neighbors scattered in the pews behind me. Their looks weren't of sympathy, but of a pitying curiosity. They were wondering the same thing I was, how a man finds himself burying his wife of half a century completely alone. Amara had fought cancer for 2 long years. 2 years of sterile hospital rooms, sleepless nights, and hopes that would flicker to life only to be extinguished again. Andre had visited a few times, always in a rush, his phone buzzing in his pocket like the entire world was waiting for him just outside that suffocating sick room. The last time he came, Amara was frail, her breath as thin as a thread of silk. She'd gripped his hand, her cloudy eyes pleading. "Andre promised me," she had whispered. "You'll look after your father. Don't let him be alone." "I promise, Mom," he'd said, his voice thick with a counterfeit emotion, his eyes already looking past her toward the door. "I'll always be there for Dad. Don't you worry." That promise now echoed in the hollow chapel, a bitter, mocking reverberation. My phone vibrated in my coat pocket. An unwelcome intrusion. I was going to ignore it, but it buzzed again, insistent. A late condolence from a distant relative, perhaps. With a weary sigh, I slipped it out, keeping it low below the line of the pew. The screen lit up with a text from Andre. A foolish flicker of hope sparked in my chest. Maybe there was a car accident. A flat tire. Any reason would be better than a deliberate choice. But then I read the words, and that flicker of hope died, leaving an icy chill in its place. "Sorry, Dad, but it's Brittany's birthday. She planned this big party at the yacht club a year ago. It's impossible to cancel. We tried, but everything was already set. I'll come by and see you later." Not a single, "How are you holding up?" Not one, "I wish I could be there." Just a cold, transactional excuse that placed his wife's birthday party above his own mother's funeral, as if Amara was a minor scheduling conflict in their busy social calendar. And then the final brutal twist of the knife. Below the text was a picture. Andre and Brittany standing on the deck of a gleaming white yacht, a brilliant blue sky and sparkling sea behind them. Brittany, in a flowing white dress, held a champagne flute high, a dazzling smile on her face. Andre stood beside her, one arm around her waist, the other holding his own glass, grinning at the camera. There was no strain in his smile. He looked genuinely, unequivocally happy. Happy while his mother was lying in a casket just a few miles away. A wave of nausea rose in my throat. I quickly blanked the screen and shoved the phone back into my pocket, the smooth glass feeling like the skin of a venomous snake. The world narrowed to the sound of the organ and the searing image of my son's smiling face. That smile burned itself into my mind. It wasn't the smile of the boy Amara and I had raised, the boy who had sobbed for a week when his childhood dog died, the young man who had stayed up all night with me when I had pneumonia. Where had that man gone? Or perhaps he never really existed at all, just an illusion I had constructed out of love and parental hope. Amara's words came back to me, then spoken in a weak but clear voice just a few months before she passed. "Larry," she'd said, "I'm scared that girl is going to ruin him. Brittany is changing our boy into someone I don't recognize anymore." I had dismissed her fears at the time. I told her Andre was a grown man, that he loved his wife, and that was what mattered. I didn't want to admit the truth that Amara, with a mother's intuition, had seen so clearly, that our son was being consumed by a world of glittering surfaces and shallow values, a world where Brittany was the queen and Andre was her loyal subject, a world where a mother's funeral was less important than a birthday party. The pastor began his eulogy speaking of Amara's kindness, her faith, her love for her family. Every word was like a dagger twisting in my gut. Family. The word felt like a hollow joke. What is family when your only child doesn't show up to hear these words? What is a legacy when your only heir doesn't care enough to honor it? I didn't cry. The tears felt frozen inside me, replaced by a cold, empty clarity. In that moment, I understood that I hadn't just lost my wife. I had lost my son, too. Maybe I had lost him a long time ago and just hadn't been willing to see it. His detachment, his absence during Amara's illness. It wasn't the behavior of a busy man. It was the symptom of a hollowed-out heart of a soul that had traded something sacred for the approval of a woman and the trappings of a lifestyle we never taught him to value. The service ended. Friends came by, shaking my hand, murmuring empty platitudes. I nodded and thanked them, my mind a million miles away. I was thinking about the future, a future without Amara, a future with a son who was now a stranger. The legacy that Amara and I had spent our lives building, not just the money, but the values, the principles, the good name of the Blackwood family. Who would I pass that on to? A man who would trade it all for a party on a boat? Numb. Absolutely not. As I walked out of the chapel alone into the bleak afternoon sun, a cold resolve began to form in my chest, hard and sharp as a diamond. Andre may have forgotten his promise to his mother, but I hadn't. I had promised Amara I would protect what we built, and if that meant protecting it from our own son, then so be it. The game had just changed. He didn't know it yet, but he would. The very next day they came. Andre and Brittany walked into my quiet house, their presence feeling like an invasion. They brought with them the scent of expensive perfume and an aura of manufactured solemnity. Brittany gave me a brief, awkward hug, her touch as light and meaningless as a falling leaf.
"We are so sorry about yesterday, Larry,"
she said, her voice dripping with a sweetness that didn't reach her eyes. Andre stood behind her, unable to meet my gaze. "It was just impossible to get out of," he mumbled, repeating the pathetic excuse from his text. "They didn't ask how I was. They didn't share a single memory of his mother." The perfunctory condolences lasted less than a minute before Andre cleared his throat, the signal that the real purpose of their visit was about to begin. "Dad," he started, adopting a tone of deep concern. "Brittany and I have been thinking a lot about you, about your future. We want to make sure you're taken care of, that you can relax and not have to worry about a thing." He gestured for me to sit on the sofa, the same sofa where Amara and I had spent countless evenings. He and Brittany sat opposite me in the armchairs, leaning forward like a pair of financial advisors about to deliver a life-changing pitch. I noticed his watch, a flashy gold monstrosity I'd never seen before, and the new designer handbag resting at Brittany's feet. They were living a life far beyond the means of a regional sales manager. I saw it all with a new, painful clarity. "We've come across an incredible investment opportunity, Dad," Andre continued, his voice gaining confidence. "A high-end resort development. The returns are practically guaranteed to be astronomical, but the window of opportunity is closing fast and we need to secure the initial capital." Brittany chimed in, her voice sharp and precise. "It's really a way of making the family's money work for us. Instead of letting your $2 million retirement fund just sit in low-yield bonds, we could turn it into $5 million, maybe more, in just a couple of years. It's just smart planning." She slid a glossy brochure across the coffee table. The cover showed smiling, attractive people lounging by an infinity pool. It looked like a fantasy. And I knew with every fiber of my being that's exactly what it was. My son wanted an advance on his inheritance. He wanted to gamble his mother's legacy, the money we had saved over a lifetime of hard work and careful planning, on some get-rich-quick scheme to fund his wife's extravagant tastes. I thought of Amara again, her warning echoing in my mind. He's trying to turn our son into someone else. She hadn't been wrong. The man sitting in front of me wasn't my son. He was a puppet, and Brittany was holding the strings. I looked at the brochure, then at their eager, expectant faces. The grief inside me was still a raw, open wound, but something else was growing alongside it now, a cold, unyielding anger. They had disrespected his mother's memory in the most callous way possible, and now they were here not to comfort me but to pick my pockets while I was still reeling from the loss. Andre pushed a document toward me, a family capital agreement. My eyes scanned the title, but my mind was elsewhere. I remembered paying off a significant credit card debt for him right after he married Brittany. He'd called it a minor business setback. I'd believed him. I'd thought it was a one-time mistake, the folly of a young man trying to impress his new wife. Now I saw it for what it was, the beginning of a pattern of living beyond his means and expecting me to be his safety net. I pushed the papers back across the table gently. I didn't say yes, but I didn't say no. "Leave it with me," I said, my voice even and calm, betraying none of the storm raging inside me. "I need some time to look this over, to think." They exchanged a quick, triumphant glance. They thought I was considering it. They thought the grieving old man was an easy mark. They saw my silence as weakness, my composure as consent. They had no idea what they had just awakened. As they left, smiling and promising to call in a few days, I knew this was more than just about money. It was about honor. It was about the promise I made to Amara. They had come for an early inheritance. Instead, they were going to get a lesson. After they left, the silence in the house felt different. It was no longer the heavy silence of grief, but the charged silence of a battlefield before the first shot is fired. The glossy brochure for the Azure Horizons Resort and Spa sat on my coffee table, an obscene splash of color in the quiet room. I didn't touch it. An engineer doesn't trust the packaging. He inspects the wiring inside. For 50 years, my life had been about data schematics and the unyielding logic of physics. Feelings could be misleading, but numbers never lied. My son had presented me with a fantasy. I was going to find the facts. I walked past the brochure and into my study, the one place in the house that was entirely mine. It was a room of order and precision. I sat down at my old oak desk and picked up the phone. I didn't call a broker. I called George. George Patterson and I had worked at the same engineering firm for 30 years. He was the head of our risk assessment division, a man whose job it was to see the cracks in any plan before they became catastrophic failures. He'd retired a few years before me, but his mind, I knew, was as sharp as ever. He answered on the second ring, his voice a familiar, gravelly calm. "Larry, I was so sorry to hear about Amara. I was going to call you in a day or two, give you some space." "I appreciate that, George," I said, my voice steady. "But I'm calling about something else. I need a favor, a professional opinion." "Anything you know that," he said, the warmth in his voice a small comfort. I gave him the name of the development company listed in the brochure and the name of the resort. I didn't tell him it was my son's proposal. I kept the emotion out of it, presenting the details as if it were just another project crossing my desk for review. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head over the phone line. "Azure Horizons," he repeated slowly. "Never heard of them. That's the first red flag. The big players in that sector are a closed club. A new name with a project this size. It smells funny. Where is the capital coming from?" "That's what I'm hoping to find out," I said. "Can you dig into them for me? See if they're legitimate. See what the real numbers look like." "Consider it done, Larry," he said, a serious edge to his voice now. "Give me 24 hours. And Larry, be careful." I hung up the phone and stared at the wall of framed blueprints behind my desk. Designs for bridges, power plants, structures built to withstand time and pressure. Amara used to joke that I tried to build my life the same way, with solid foundations and no room for error. But I had made an error, a catastrophic one. I had failed to see the structural weaknesses in my own son. The following day was the longest of my life. I tried to keep busy sorting through Amara's things, a task I had been dreading, but every object, every dress, every book only amplified my sense of loss and betrayal. How could Andre do this now of all times, while the scent of his mother's memory still lingered in every room late that afternoon? An email notification chimed on my computer. The subject line was simple: regarding Azure Horizons. It was from George. I opened it, my heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. It wasn't a long email. It was a concise, brutal demolition. George had attached a full workup, but he summarized the grim findings in a few bullet points. The development company was a shell corporation registered offshore just 6 months ago. It had no assets, no construction permits, and no history of any completed projects. The names listed as principals were linked to 2 other real estate ventures that had collapsed, taking investors' money with them. There were already 2 pending lawsuits against them for fraud in another state. It wasn't just a bad investment, it was a ghost, a carefully constructed illusion designed to lure in unsuspecting investors and drain them dry before vanishing. George had written a final line at the bottom of the email. "Larry, whatever this is, walk away. Don't walk. Run. This isn't just risky. It's a loaded gun pointed at your head." I leaned back in my chair, the leather groaning under my weight. There was no shock, no surprise. Just a deep, hollowing confirmation of the fear that had taken root in my soul the day before. My son hadn't just brought me a risky investment. He had brought me a loaded gun and asked me to pull the trigger on myself. The question was no longer whether I would give him the money. The question now was much, much darker. Did he know he was leading his own father into a scam? Or was he simply a fool so blinded by greed and desperation that he couldn't see the truth? Either way, the betrayal was absolute. And my investigation was only just beginning. The knowledge that my son had tried to lure me into a financial trap was a heavy, cold stone in my gut. But George's report had only answered the what. It hadn't answered the why. My engineering mind couldn't leave the problem half solved. I needed to understand the full schematic of this disaster. I needed to see the complete picture, no matter how ugly. My investigation began with a ghost from the past, a simple savings account I had co-signed for Andre when he started college more than 20 years ago. It was meant for his textbooks and living expenses. As far as I knew, it had been dormant for years, holding nothing but a few dollars and some dust. I still had the online login credentials saved in an old password manager. With a few clicks, I was in. I had expected to find a forgotten relic. Instead, I found a crime scene. The account, which should have been quiet, was buzzing with a frantic, desperate energy. In the last 3 months, there had been a flurry of activity. Small deposits from payment apps I'd barely heard of, Venmo, Zelle, immediately followed by withdrawals that drained the account back down to near zero. It was the financial equivalent of someone gasping for air. Who was sending him this money, and where was it going so quickly? It looked like he was shuffling small debts, borrowing from one person to pay another, a frantic shell game played with digital dollars. This wasn't the behavior of a successful manager planning a major investment. This was the mark of a man on the brink. The next piece of the puzzle arrived by chance, or perhaps by the hand of a careless god. The mail came, and mixed in with my letters of condolence was a thick envelope addressed to Andre. It wasn't unusual. He'd neglected to update his mailing address for some of his less important accounts over the years. Usually I would set them aside for him. But this one was from a major credit card company, the window on the envelope ominously showing a balance in bright red ink. In my current state of mind, privacy felt like a luxury I could no longer afford. My hands didn't even shake as I slit the envelope open. The number at the bottom of the page made my breath catch in my chest. The credit limit was $60,000. The amount due was $60,112, maxed out and over the limit. But it was the itemized list of charges that told the real story. It was a chronicle of a life lived for appearances. $500 dinners at restaurants I'd only ever read about, weekend trips to luxury spas, a charge for over $4,000 at a designer boutique on Rodeo Drive, another for a custom suit. It was a desperate performance of wealth, a lifestyle funded by debt. I could almost see Brittany in my mind's eye posing for her social media followers with a new handbag, hashtagging her photos with words like blessed and living our best life. Their best life, it turned out, was being paid for with borrowed money at an interest rate of 24%. One discovery led to another. Fueled by a cold, grim determination, I went back to my computer. Property records are public information. I went to the county assessor's website and typed in Andre's address. The house he and Brittany had been so proud of, the one Amara and I had helped them with the down payment for. I had felt such pride that day, seeing my son stand in front of his own home. He was building something solid, I thought. He was putting down roots. The first mortgage was what I expected. But then I saw the second lien, a home equity line of credit taken out 18 months ago. The credit line was for $150,000. The current balance, $149,800. They had stripped every last cent of equity from their home, turning a symbol of stability into a monument of their desperation. They had nothing left. They were living on thin air and borrowed time. I leaned back, the pieces of the puzzle clicking into place, forming a picture of absolute devastation. The frantic shuffling of money in the old savings account, the maxed out credit cards, the drained home equity. It all pointed to one terrifying conclusion. The $2 million investment wasn't a get-rich-quick scheme. It was a bailout. It was a desperate last-ditch Hail Mary pass to get a massive infusion of cash before the entire house of cards came crashing down around them. They weren't just greedy. They were drowning in a sea of their own lies and reckless spending. And when they saw they were going under, they looked at me, their grieving father, not as a person to turn to for help, but as a life raft to be seized, even if it meant pulling me down with them. The cold resolve in my heart hardened into something else. It was no longer just about teaching my son a lesson. It was about surviving him. The man I was up against wasn't just my foolish, misguided son. He was a desperate stranger, and desperate men do desperate things. I now understood the full scope of the threat, and I knew I had to act not just with the wisdom of a father, but with the cold, calculating precision of an engineer about to defuse a bomb. I couldn't carry this burden alone. The data I had uncovered was one thing, a cold set of facts. But the weight of what it all meant, the sheer scale of the betrayal, was too much for one man to bear. There was only one person I knew I could trust to see the entire ugly picture and not flinch: Nina Washington. Her father and I had grown up together, worked on the same assembly line in our youth before I went to engineering school. I had watched Nina grow from a bright, fiercely intelligent little girl into a sharp, formidable lawyer. Amara and I had helped with her tuition for law school. She was like a niece to us. She was family in a way my own son no longer seemed to be. Her office was a sleek, modern space downtown, a world away from my quiet, memory-filled house. Nina greeted me with a warm, compassionate hug. "Uncle Larry," she said softly, "I'm so sorry about Aunt Amara. I was heartbroken to hear." I just nodded, the words catching in my throat. She led me to a chair in her office, her expression full of genuine concern. "What's wrong?" she asked, her lawyer's eyes already seeing that this was more than just a social call from a grieving old friend. I took a deep breath and began to speak, and I told her everything. I didn't start with the money. I started with the funeral. I told her about the empty pew, the silence where my son should have been. I told her about the text message and the picture of him smiling on that yacht. I needed her to understand the heart of the matter first, the wound, the disrespect that went deeper than any financial ledger could show. Her expression shifted from sympathy to a quiet, controlled anger. She listened without interrupting, her focus absolute. Then I laid out the second part of the story. I told her about Andre's visit, the glossy brochure, and the $2 million request. I handed her the printout of George's report on the Shell Corporation. I showed her the credit card statement I'd opened, its pages a testament to a life of reckless indulgence. I told her about the drained home equity, the last dollars squeezed from their only real asset. I presented the facts as I had uncovered them, methodically, like an engineer detailing a catastrophic system failure. When I finished, the silence in the room was heavy. Nina stared at the papers on her desk, her jaw tight. She looked up at me, and the compassion in her eyes was now overlaid with a steely resolve. "Uncle Larry," she said, her voice low and firm, "this isn't just a case of a son being irresponsible with money. And it isn't just a family dispute. This is a calculated attempt to defraud you." The word defraud hung in the air, cold and sharp. Hearing it from a lawyer, from Nina, made it terrifyingly real. "He's your son," she continued, "but right now you can't think of him that way. You have to think of him as a hostile party. The man you've described is desperate, and a desperate person backed into a financial corner is capable of anything." She leaned forward, her gaze intense. "The investment was never the point. The point was to get his hands on your liquid assets to cover the massive hole he's dug for himself. He came to you the day after his mother's funeral because he thought you would be at your most vulnerable. He wasn't just being callous, he was being strategic." Her words hit me with the force of a physical blow. Of course, it wasn't just thoughtlessness. It was a plan, a cold, predatory plan. I had been so lost in my own grief that I hadn't seen the calculated cruelty of it all. Nina stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the city. "We are not going to be defensive," she said, her back to me. "We are going to be proactive. We are going to protect you, and we are going to protect Aunt Amara's legacy. This stops now." When she turned back to me, her face was set. The time for grieving was still there, but now it would have to wait. The time for fighting had begun, and for the first time in days, I no longer felt like I was fighting alone. Nina gestured toward a thick binder on her credenza. Before we discuss strategy, I need to review the most important document in all of this, your and Aunt Amara's estate plan. The original is in our firm's vault. Let's pull up the signed digital copy. It's crucial we know exactly what it says and where the vulnerabilities are. She turned to her large monitor, her fingers flying across the keyboard. A moment later, a formal-looking document filled the screen. Okay, she said, her voice all business. The Blackwood Family Trust established 10 years ago. Let's see. She scrolled through the pages, her expression focused, her brow slightly furrowed. I sat in the chair opposite her, watching her, feeling a strange sense of detachment, as if this were happening to someone else. This document full of legal jargon was supposed to be the final chapter of my life with Amara, a neat and tidy plan for the end. I never imagined it would become a weapon in a war against my own son. Nina paused, her cursor hovering over a section halfway through the document. She leaned closer to the screen, her eyes narrowing. "Wait a minute," she murmured, more to herself than to me. She read the passage again, then scrolled back a few pages, then forward again, comparing sections. A slow smile spread across her face. It was not a smile of amusement, but of discovery. The smile of an engineer who has just found the hidden load-bearing wall that changes the entire structure of the problem. "Oh, Aunt Amara," she whispered, shaking her head in admiration. "You were always 10 steps ahead of everyone else." She turned to me, her eyes shining with a new light. "Uncle Larry," she said, her voice filled with a reverence that took me by surprise. "Your wife was a brilliant woman, not just kind and loving. She was a brilliant strategist." I was confused. "What is it, Nina? What did you find?" "It's a clause," she said, pointing to the screen. "A very specific, very powerful clause she had me add about 5 years ago, not long after Andre and Brittany got married. You both signed the addendum, but she was the one who insisted on it. She was worried even back then." She took a deep breath. "Okay, let me break this down. Most standard wills or trusts of your size would designate the primary heir, in this case Andre, as the direct beneficiary upon your passing. The assets would transfer to him, and he could do whatever he wanted with them." That was what I remembered. Simple. Clean. But Amara wasn't satisfied with that, Nina continued. She saw the way Brittany was influencing him. She saw his financial carelessness. She didn't want the legacy you two built together over 50 years to be squandered on designer handbags and sports cars. She wanted it to last for generations. Nina turned the monitor toward me. "Look here. It's called the Generational Heritage Safeguard Clause. It's not standard legal boilerplate. It's something we drafted specifically for her." She began to explain, translating the dense legal text into plain English. "What this clause does," she said, "is fundamentally change how the inheritance is passed down. Upon your passing, the estate does not go directly to Andre. Instead, it flows into a new irrevocable trust. Let's call it the Blackwood Grandchildren's Trust." My heart skipped a beat. Grandchildren. We didn't have any yet. "Exactly," Nina said, reading my mind. "The trust is established for the benefit of Andre's future children. He, as the trustee, is allowed to manage the funds. He can make sound investments to grow the principal. He can even draw a reasonable annual salary for his duties as manager, a salary determined by the trust's independent executor, which is my firm." She paused for effect. "But here is the brilliant part. He cannot touch the principal, not one single penny of it for his own personal use. The funds are legally locked away, designated only for specific pre-approved expenses for your grandchildren, their health, their education up to the university level, and a down payment on their first home. The money is for them, not for him." The sheer, elegant genius of it struck me like a bolt of lightning. Amara. From beyond the grave, she had reached out and built a fortress around our life's work. A fortress designed to protect it from the one person she feared would destroy it. She hadn't disinherited her son. That would have been an act of anger. Instead, she had simply outsmarted him. She had created a structure that forced him to be the responsible steward of a legacy for his own children, whether he wanted to or not. He would be the guardian of a treasure he could never spend. It was an act not of punishment, but of profound forward-thinking love. She was protecting him from himself, I said aloud, the realization dawning on me, and protecting our future grandchildren from their parents' irresponsibility. She was, Nina affirmed. This clause means that Andre's entire motivation for wanting your money now makes perfect sense. He knows about this. He must have read the will at some point. He knows that once you are gone, the vault is locked. His inheritance is effectively out of his reach. So his only chance of getting a massive payday to solve his debt crisis is to convince you to give it to him while you're still alive. A wave of emotion washed over me, grief so sharp and fresh, it felt like the day she died, mingled with an overwhelming sense of love and admiration. I could almost picture her sitting in this very office 5 years ago, her expression determined, explaining her fears to a young Nina, carefully building this legal firewall. She had seen the storm coming long before I had. While I was still indulging Andre making excuses for him blinded by a father's love, Amara had been clear-eyed. She had seen the truth and had taken quiet, decisive action. This revelation changed everything. It meant Andre wasn't just acting out of greed. He was acting out of a desperate, panicked knowledge that his future access to the family fortune was a mirage. He was running out of time, and it meant that Amara hadn't just left me a will, she had left me a weapon. A perfectly legal, morally unassailable defense against our son's worst impulses. "So, what does this mean for us now?" I asked Nina, my voice thick with emotion. Nina turned the monitor back toward her, a fierce glint in her eye. "It means," she said, "that we're no longer just playing defense. It means we have leverage. It means your son thinks he's holding all the cards, but we know he's playing with an empty hand. Now, let's talk about how we use that to our advantage." The knowledge of what Amara had done settled over me, a shield against my own grief. I felt her strength, her wisdom flowing through me. My sorrow was still there, a deep and aching void, but it was no longer a weakness. It was a source of resolve. I looked at Nina, and she looked back at me, a silent understanding passing between us. The time for defense was over. It was time to build our own plan. "He's going to call soon," I said, my voice firmer than it had been in days. "He'll be expecting an answer about his investment." Nina nodded, walking back to her desk and picking up a pen. "And we're going to give him one," she said. "But not the one he's expecting. Our goal here isn't just to shut him down, Uncle Larry. Saying no is easy, but it won't teach him anything. He'll just get angry and look for another way to get what he wants. We need him to understand the gravity of what he has done. We need to let him walk into a trap of his own making." Her logic was flawless. A simple refusal would just be a temporary roadblock for a desperate man. A lesson, however, had to be learned. It had to be felt. "He's after a large liquid asset," Nina continued, thinking aloud. "Something he can leverage quickly. He asked for $2 million, so we're going to offer him something worth $2 million. I must have looked shocked because she raised a hand. "We're not going to give it to him, not really. We're going to offer him bait, the most attractive, irresistible bait we can find. Is there an asset, a piece of property perhaps, that has not only monetary value but emotional value to him as well?" Immediately my mind went to the lake house, the cedar-sided cabin nestled in the pines 2 hours north of the city. Amara had called it her sanctuary. We had bought it when Andre was just a boy. We'd taught him to fish on that lake, spent countless summer evenings on that porch watching the sunset paint the water in shades of orange and purple. The memories were so thick there you could almost breathe them in. It was the heart of our family's happiest moments. "The house at Silver Lake," I said, my voice thick with the memory of it all. "It's paid off. The last appraisal put it right around $2 million. He loved that place as a kid." "Perfect," Nina said, a grim satisfaction in her voice. "It's perfect because it's personal. By offering it, you're not just offering him money, you're offering him a piece of his own childhood. It will make your story that you've been won over, that you're making a great sacrifice for his future, completely believable. He won't be able to resist." The thought of using that sacred place as part of a trap felt like a desecration, and I told her so. "It feels wrong, Nina, using Amara's favorite place against her own son." Nina's expression softened. "I know it does," she said gently. "But think of it this way. We're not using it against him. We're using it to protect the very values that house represents. We're going to draw up a transfer of ownership agreement. On the surface, it will give him everything he wants, but buried in the legal language will be a clause, a poison pill. A clause that will make the property worthless to his creditors and investors, and that will link his ownership to his duties to his mother's legacy. He won't read the fine print, I guarantee it. He and his wife will be so blinded by the prize they'll sign whatever we put in front of them." I looked at her, then looked out the window. It was a cold, calculated plan. And it was exactly what needed to be done. "Do it," I said. "Draw up the papers." The phone rang 3 days later, just as Nina had predicted. It was Andre. His voice was laced with a forced casualness that barely concealed the anxious tremor underneath. "Hey, Dad," he said. "Just calling to check in, see how you're doing." I let the silence hang for a moment, a calculated pause. I conjured the image of Amara in my mind, the memory of her weak but loving smile in those final days. I let the real grief, the profound loss I felt for her seep into my voice. I'm getting by, son," I said, my voice quiet and weary. "The house is too quiet. I keep thinking I hear your mother in the other room." I heard him shift uncomfortably on the other end of the line. "Yeah, I bet," he said quickly.
Look, Dad, I don't want to bother you, but have you had a chance to think about, our proposal?"
The bait was dangling. It was time to set the hook. I let out a long, heavy sigh, the kind of sound a man makes when he's carrying the weight of the world. "I have Andre," I said. "It's all I've been thinking about, to be honest. Your mother, she worried about you, about your future. She wanted to make sure you were secure." This wasn't a lie. It was the truth, just repurposed for my own ends. I've been sitting here alone looking at these four walls, and I've been thinking about what really matters: legacy, family. And I realized your mother would want me to help you. She would want me to invest in my own son. I could almost hear the sharp intake of breath on his end, the sound of victory. "Dad, that's amazing," he stammered. "You won't regret this. This is going to be huge for all of us. But I'm not going to give you the cash," I said, cutting him off gently. The performance of a lifetime required careful pacing. I had to introduce an obstacle to make the final offer seem like a true concession. "That money is my nest egg. It's all I have left for my own care if something happens. I can't touch the principal. It wouldn't be responsible." I heard a flicker of panic in his voice. "Oh, well, but Dad, the whole point was—" "Let me finish," I said, my tone still soft but with an undercurrent of fatherly authority. "I'm not going to leave you empty-handed. I lay awake all last night thinking about what else I could do, what else we have. And there is one other thing, an asset of significant value." I paused again, letting him wait, letting his desperation build. "The lake house," I said, my voice thick with manufactured emotion. The line went completely silent. He was stunned. I knew he would be. The lake house was our family's crown jewel, a place so intertwined with our history that the idea of selling it had always been unthinkable. "Dad," he finally whispered, his voice incredulous, "you can't be serious." "I've never been more serious in my life, son," I said, letting my voice crack just a little. "Your mother loved that house more than any place on earth. We taught you to swim in that lake. We celebrated your 10th birthday on that porch. Every beam, every floorboard holds a memory of her. The thought of letting it go, it tears me apart." I let that sink in, painting myself as the grieving husband making the ultimate sacrifice. But memories don't pay for the future. You and Brittany have a chance to build something. Your mother would want me to give you that chance. The house is worth what you need. It's paid for, clear and free. You can use it as collateral. You can do whatever you need to do with it to secure your future. It's a better investment than just sitting there collecting dust and memories. The greed in his voice when he finally spoke was so naked it was almost pathetic. "Dad, I don't know what to say. The lake house. Are you sure? I'm not happy about it," I said, my voice a portrait of weary resignation. "It feels like I'm selling off a piece of my soul. But you're my son, and your mother would have wanted me to put you first. This is me putting you first, Andre." "Thank you," he breathed, the words tumbling out in a rush of relief and excitement. "Thank you, Dad. You have no idea what this means. Brittany is going to be ecstatic. We won't let you down. We'll make you so proud." I closed my eyes. "I know you will, son," I lied. I'll have my lawyer, Nina Washington, draw up the transfer papers. You and Brittany will need to come in and sign them." "Of course, Dad. Anything. We'll be there tomorrow if you need us." His voice was bright, energetic, the voice of a man who had just won the lottery. He had no idea he was eagerly volunteering to walk into a cage. "I'll have Nina call you to set it up," I said, and before he could say another word, I ended the call.
The line went dead, and I sat there in the silence, the weight of my own performance settling upon me. The bait had been taken. The trap was about to be sprung, and I felt no triumph. Only a profound, aching sadness for the son I used to have. 2 days later, we were all gathered in Nina's formal conference room. The space was designed to impress with a long, polished mahogany table, high-backed leather chairs, and a panoramic view of the city skyline. It was a room that commanded respect for the law and the weight of the documents signed within it, but Andre and Brittany didn't seem to notice. They were practically vibrating with excitement, a giddy, triumphant energy that felt jarringly out of place. Brittany was dressed as if for a magazine shoot, and she kept whispering to Andre, pointing to things on her phone, a listing for a new Mercedes, a vacation home in Aspen. Andre, trying to maintain a facade of solemnity for my benefit, kept nodding along, his eyes shining with a greedy light. I sat at the head of the table, silent, playing my part as the grieving patriarch making a solemn sacrifice. Nina sat to my right, the picture of professional composure, a thick stack of legal documents squared perfectly in front of her. "Thank you for coming in, Andre." Brittany, Nina began, her voice calm and neutral. "As you know, we're here to finalize the transfer of the property at Silver Lake, as per your father's wishes. This is the deed of gift and transfer agreement. It's a bit lengthy, but we need to ensure everything is done by the book." She slid 2 thick copies across the table. They landed with a heavy, definitive thud. I watched them pick up the documents. It was all for show. They weren't reading, they were scanning. Their fingers flipped through the pages impatiently, their eyes hunting for the parts that mattered to them. The property value appraisal, the line stating the transfer was total and irrevocable, and the final page with the signature lines. They saw the document not as a contract to be understood, but as a final hurdle to be cleared before their victory lap. Brittany's attention was so fleeting she was checking her reflection in the dark screen of her phone between page turns. "It all seems pretty standard," Andre said, trying to sound knowledgeable, pushing the papers forward. "Where do we sign?" Nina held up a hand gently. "Almost there. I'm legally obligated to walk you through the key sections." Her tone was deliberately dry, the monotonous voice of a bureaucrat reciting regulations. It was a masterful performance. She pointed to a few paragraphs explaining the legal description of the property, the tax implications, the waiver of future claims, all standard, all boring. Andre and Brittany nodded along, their eyes glazing over. They were practically vibrating with the desire to just get it over with. Then came the critical moment. Nina casually flipped toward the back of the document. "And finally," she said in the same flat tone, "we have the appendices. Appendix A is the property survey. Appendix B outlines the standard familial duties and heritage clauses which are attached to any significant asset transfer from the Blackwood Family Trust. It's just some boilerplate your mother insisted on years ago about honoring the family's legacy. A formality, really. You just need to initial the bottom of the page." I held my breath. That boilerplate, that formality, was the entire mechanism of the trap. It was the page detailing the Amara Blackwood Heritage Reevaluation Clause, the legal poison pill that would render the property worthless for their purposes. It was all there in plain English if they had only bothered to read it. I saw Brittany roll her eyes ever so slightly, a flicker of contempt for what she clearly viewed as sentimental nonsense from a dead woman. Andre just picked up the pen, eager to finish. "Got it," he said. "Legacy stuff. Of course." He initialed the bottom of the appendix without a second glance and flipped to the final page. He signed his name with a bold, triumphant flourish. Brittany co-signed beside him, her signature a stylish, loopy script. They pushed the signed document back to the center of the table as if they had just won a championship trophy. As I watched the ink dry on their signatures, I felt a profound wave of sadness. I looked at my son's face, flushed with victory, and I saw a stranger. I saw a man so blinded by his own desires that he couldn't see the love and history he was signing away. He thought he was claiming an asset, but he was exposing a deep character flaw, a flaw his mother had seen and had tried in her own wise way to protect him from. He hadn't just been careless, he had been arrogant. He had believed himself to be smarter, to be more deserving than the values his mother and I had tried to instill in him. And in that moment, he had sealed his own fate. "Well," Nina said, gathering the documents and passing them to a notary who had been waiting quietly in the corner. "That's all done."
The notary affixed her seal with a heavy final stamp. The sound echoed in the quiet room. "Dad, thank you," Andre said, standing up, his voice overflowing with a gratitude that was entirely self-serving. "You have no idea what this means for us. We won't let you down." Brittany was already on her phone, tapping away furiously, no doubt texting their banker or a real estate agent. They said their quick goodbyes and practically floated out of the room, their minds already in a future filled with new cars and luxury vacations. They left Nina and me alone at the long table. The second signed copy of the contract sat between us. It wasn't a symbol of a family's future. It was the official record of a son's great betrayal and a father's painful, necessary response. The trap was now legally binding. All that was left was for them to walk into it. As the door clicked shut behind them, a heavy silence fell over the conference room. The signed contract lay on the polished table between Nina and me, a silent testament to the morning's proceedings. I stared at my son's bold, arrogant signature next to his wife's stylish script. "Walk me through it one more time, Nina," I said, my voice low. "The clause. I want to understand exactly how the teeth of this trap are designed to bite." Nina nodded, pulling the document closer. She opened it to the appendix, her finger tracing the dense legal text. "It's all about how it's framed, Uncle Larry," she began. "I named it the Amara Blackwood Heritage Reevaluation Clause for a very specific reason. The name itself is the first layer of the trap. It sounds sentimental, honorary. It sounds like exactly the kind of emotional nonsense that a woman like Brittany would dismiss and a man as desperate as Andre would ignore. It invites them to skip over it, and they did." She tapped a paragraph. "The first set of teeth is here the conditions of use. The clause explicitly states that the Silver Lake property is being gifted as a place of family heritage and continuity. That's the key legal phrase. It means the property cannot be leveraged as collateral for any high-risk or speculative commercial venture. It strictly forbids using the home to secure loans for businesses that are not directly related to community improvement or family well-being as defined by the trust's charter. In simple terms, the moment Andre walks into a bank and says, 'I want to mortgage this house to fund a resort development,' the bank's lawyers will flag this clause. They will see that the title is conditional. The property becomes radioactive as collateral for the very thing he wants to do. He can live in it, he can enjoy it with his family, but he cannot cash it out for a get-rich-quick scheme. He signed a contract agreeing that the house is a home, not an ATM. So the bank will just say no," I clarified. "Exactly," Nina confirmed. "But that's only the first part of the trap. The second part ensures that even if he finds some predatory lender willing to overlook the risk, he still can't win." She pointed to the next section. "These are the contingent familial duties. This is the part that ties his ownership directly to his character. The contract legally obligates him as the new owner to personally uphold certain aspects of his mother's legacy. For example, he is required to make a $5,000 annual donation from his own funds to the Lung Cancer Research Foundation Amara supported. He is also required to personally volunteer a minimum of 40 hours per year at the youth center she helped establish downtown. There must be a signed record of his attendance. Failure to meet these obligations constitutes a material breach of the gift's terms." I shook my head in quiet admiration. She had chained him to the very responsibilities he had spent years avoiding. Brittany would never allow him to give $5,000 of their money to charity, and the idea of him spending his weekends at a youth center was laughable. It was a test he was guaranteed to fail. "And what happens when he fails?" I asked. "That," Nina said, a grim smile touching her lips, "is the beauty of the reevaluation part of the clause. If any of the conditions are breached either by attempting to leverage the property for a forbidden commercial use or by failing to perform the familial duties, the gift is subject to an immediate and automatic reevaluation. And the contract he signed stipulates that the result of that reevaluation is that the deed of ownership is rendered null and void. The property ownership immediately and legally reverts to its previous status. It goes right back into the Blackwood Family Trust with you as the sole trustee. There's no lengthy court battle. There are no grounds for him to sue. He willingly signed a contract that clearly stated the consequences of his own actions. He will have built the cage, walked into it, and locked the door behind himself." The elegant, inescapable logic of it was breathtaking. It wasn't just a trap, it was a character test. It gave Andre the keys to a kingdom, but only if he acted like a king worthy of it. If he acted like the man Amara and I had tried to raise, he could keep the house forever. But if he acted like the greedy, thoughtless man he had become, the house would vanish from his grasp like smoke.
It was a perfect self-executing piece of justice. Amara would have been proud. I didn't see them for the next few days, but I didn't have to. I knew my son. I could picture their celebration with perfect, painful clarity. I imagined them leaving Nina's office, stepping into the elevator, the facade of solemn respect dropping the moment the doors slid shut. I could see Brittany letting out a triumphant squeal, throwing her arms around Andre's neck. I could hear his boisterous laugh, the sound of a man who believed he had just pulled off the smartest deal of his life. In the car on the way home, they wouldn't have spoken of me or of Amara or of the memories contained in the lake house they now possessed. They would have spoken of numbers. Brittany, pragmatic and ruthless, would have already had her calculator app open, figuring out the maximum loan-to-value ratio they could get from the bank. If it's appraised at $2 million, I could hear her saying, we should be able to get at least 1.5, maybe 1.6 in cash. That's more than enough to cover everything and get the resort share. Andre, basking in the glow of what he saw as his own cleverness, would have been dreaming bigger. This is just the beginning, he'd say. Once this resort deal pays out, we're set for life. No more worrying about credit card bills, no more juggling payments. They wouldn't have waited for the bank's approval. Their arrogance wouldn't allow for the possibility of failure. I have no doubt the spending started that very same afternoon. It would have begun with what they called celebrating. They would have gone to their favorite upscale restaurant, the one with the white tablecloths and the wine list as thick as a novel, and ordered the most expensive items on the menu. They would have toasted their success, their future, their cleverness with champagne that cost more than my first car. The next day, Andre would have walked into a luxury car dealership. He wouldn't buy, not yet. He would just browse. He'd let the salesman fawn over him, take a gleaming new German sports sedan for a test drive, feeling the power of the engine under his foot. He would have returned to the dealership with a smug smile and put down a $5,000 deposit on his credit card to hold it, telling the salesman he'd be back with the full payment in a week. Meanwhile, Brittany would be orchestrating the public relations campaign for their new life. Her social media would have been a flurry of carefully curated hints and boasts. A picture of 2 champagne glasses with the caption, "2 New Beginnings." A photo of a designer travel website with the Eiffel Tower on the screen captioned, "Big Things on the Horizon." She was building a narrative of success, creating an audience for a triumph that hadn't even happened yet. The conversations in their house, I'm sure, would have been even more revealing. "He was so emotional," Brittany would say, analyzing my performance. "It was easy. He feels guilty and lonely. He was practically begging to give it to us." They would have laughed about the legacy stuff in the contract. "Can you believe that nonsense about volunteering?" Andre would chuckle. "Like I have time for that. We'll just write a check and say we did it. Who's going to check?" They would have already been planning the sale of the lake house itself, discussing how quickly they could get it on the market after the bank loan came through. "We'll have to clear out all of Mom's old junk first." Andre would say the words, a casual desecration of his own childhood. "It'll probably take a whole weekend." They were living in a fantasy, a bubble of greed and arrogance, completely unaware that the ground beneath their feet was about to give way. They had their hands on the deed, they had signed the papers, and in their minds the game was already over. They had won. They were just waiting for the phone to ring with the news that their new life was ready to be collected. And that phone call was coming. It just wasn't the one they were expecting. The phone call they had been waiting for came on a Tuesday afternoon. It wasn't the loan officer confirming their wire transfer, however. It was a curt summons from the bank's vice president of lending, a man named Mr. Davies. He requested their presence for a meeting to clarify some issues with their application. Brittany was annoyed by the delay, seeing it as a symptom of bureaucratic incompetence. "Honestly," she complained to Andre as they drove to the bank's downtown headquarters, "you'd think they'd never seen a $2 million piece of real estate before. What is there to clarify?" Andre, already picturing himself behind the wheel of his new car, just shrugged. "We'll go and smile sign a few more papers and be done with it. It's just a formality." They walked into Mr. Davies' spacious office with the unearned confidence of lottery winners arriving to claim their prize. Mr. Davies, an older man with a severe suit and an expression that suggested he'd never smiled in his life, did not stand to greet them. He gestured to the 2 chairs opposite his massive desk. "Mr. and Mrs. Blackwood," he began, his voice flat and devoid of any warmth. "Thank you for coming in. I will be direct. We are denying your loan application." The words dropped into the room like stones into a silent pool. Brittany's polite smile froze on her face. Andre just stared, blinking as if he'd misheard. Brittany said, her voice a little too high. I'm sorry, there must be a mistake. Our collateral is valued at over $2 million. The paperwork is perfect. Mr. Davies slid a single sheet of paper across the desk. It was a copy of the appendix page they had initialed without a second thought. The paperwork is indeed legal, Mrs. Blackwood. The problem is, our legal team has read it. Specifically, they have read the Amara Blackwood Heritage Reevaluation Clause. Brittany glanced at the paper and laughed a short, sharp, dismissive sound. Oh, that. Honestly, that's just some sentimental nonsense my late mother-in-law insisted on years ago. It's about honoring the family legacy or something. It's just a formality. It has no real legal standing. Mr. Davies remained impassive, his gaze like chips of ice. On the contrary, Mrs. Blackwood, he said, his voice dangerously quiet. It has all the legal standing in the world, and it is far from a formality. He put on a pair of reading glasses and looked down at a report on his desk. This clause places significant and legally binding restrictions on the use of the property. It explicitly forbids leveraging the asset as collateral for any high-risk or speculative commercial venture. A loan to fund an investment in an unproven, unregistered offshore resort development falls squarely into that category. The title is encumbered. It is not clean. Andre finally found his voice a panicked squeak. What are you talking about? My father gave us that house. It's ours. The deed says so. The deed says you were gifted the house under certain conditions, Mr. Blackwood, Mr. Davies corrected him, his tone becoming severe. Conditions you legally agreed to when you signed the contract. This clause effectively makes the property's ownership conditional. For the purposes of a commercial loan, this document, he tapped the appendix page, renders the property worthless to this bank. We have a fiduciary duty to our shareholders. We cannot and will not accept a compromised asset as security. The reality of the situation finally began to penetrate their bubble of arrogant delusion. The color drained from Brittany's face, replaced by a splotchy, furious red. The friendly, charming facade dissolved, revealing the raw, ugly panic beneath. This is ridiculous, she snapped, her voice rising. Are your lawyers complete idiots? It's a signed, notarized deed. We own it. Mr. Davies leaned back in his chair, his expression unchanging. He had clearly dealt with people like them before. Your ownership is contingent upon your behavior. Furthermore, he said, and here he paused, letting the weight of his next words sink in. The clause also contains provisions regarding certain familial duties you are required to perform. Failure to do so, or the very act of attempting to use the property for a forbidden purpose, triggers an immediate reevaluation. As a result of that reevaluation, the title is automatically rendered null and void, and ownership reverts to the Blackwood Family Trust. He took off his glasses and looked them straight in the eye. By coming to this bank and explicitly stating your intention to violate the terms of your contract, you haven't just invalidated your loan application. You have likely invalidated your ownership of the property altogether. Your father's gift came with rules. You broke them. I would strongly advise you to consult your own attorney, though I suspect he will tell you the same thing. It was over. The dream, the new life, the millions of dollars, all of it vanished in the cold, sterile air of that office. They had been so close they could taste it, and now it was gone. Andre looked like he was going to be sick. Brittany was on her feet, trembling with a mixture of rage and sheer terror. The debts, the maxed-out credit cards, the empty home equity line, all of that was still real. The solution had been an illusion. "You can't do this," she whispered, her voice cracking. Mr. Davies stood up, a clear signal that the meeting was over. "I haven't done anything, Mrs. Blackwood," he said, his voice devoid of any pity. "You have. The bank's decision is final. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have another meeting." He walked to the door and held it open for them. The walk out of the bank was a silent, humiliating parade of failure. The confident swagger was gone, replaced by the frantic, panicked shuffle of people whose world had just been pulled out from under them. They didn't speak until they were back in their car, the doors slammed shut, creating a sealed capsule of fury and blame. And then Brittany turned to Andre, her face a mask of contempt. "You fool," she hissed. "Your senile old man played you for a fool, and you let him." They didn't call. They just showed up. The doorbell rang with a long, angry peal that echoed through my quiet house. I knew it was them. I had been waiting. Nina was with me, sitting in an armchair in the living room, a slim leather portfolio resting on her lap. I opened the door and they stormed past me, their faces twisted with a rage so potent it felt like a physical force. Andre's face was flushed, his eyes wild with fury. Brittany looked like a cornered animal, all bared teeth and simmering hatred. "You tricked me," Andre spat, his voice shaking. He threw a crumpled copy of the transfer agreement onto the coffee table. It skidded across the polished wood and landed at my feet. "You set me up! This whole thing was a lie!" Brittany was right behind him, her voice a shrill accusation. "This is elder abuse. It's manipulation. We have a lawyer and he is going to take you for everything you have." "You can't just give someone a gift and then secretly attach a bunch of ridiculous strings to it." I didn't say a word. I just looked at my son, at the stranger standing in my living room, and felt a profound, bottomless sorrow. Nina stood up, her movements calm and deliberate. She was the picture of tranquility in the eye of their storm. "There were no secrets, Brittany," she said, her voice cutting through their tirade with the clean, sharp edge of a scalpel. "And there were no tricks. You both signed a legally binding contract. The fact that you chose not to read it carefully is not Lawrence's fault." Andre scoffed, a bitter, disbelieving sound. "That heritage clause, the bank manager laughed at us. He said it was a joke." "The bank manager is a prudent man," Nina replied smoothly. "He understands, as you clearly do not, that a contract is the sum of all its parts, not just the parts you find convenient. You initialed the appendix. You agreed to the terms. You agreed that the property was a place of family heritage and continuity. You agreed to the charitable donations and the volunteer work in your mother's name, and you agreed to the consequences if you failed to meet those terms. It's all there on page 12, paragraph 4. "This is entrapment," Brittany shrieked. "You knew we wanted to use it for an investment. You set us up to fail." Nina allowed a small, cold smile to touch her lips. "Yes," she said, her voice dropping to an icy calm. "We did. We knew you wouldn't read it. We knew you wouldn't perform the duties. We knew your character. The contract didn't trap you. It merely exposed you." Andre took a step forward, his fists clenched. "We'll see you in court. We'll tell the judge how my grieving father took advantage of me." That's when Nina opened her portfolio. The final phase of the plan. "I don't think you want to go to court, Andre," she said, her voice now completely devoid of any warmth. "Because if you do, this is what we will present as evidence of your character and intent." She laid a single sheet of paper on the coffee table. It was the one-page summary from George's report on the Azure Horizons resort. "This," she said, "is a detailed analysis of your investment opportunity. It shows that it is a shell corporation with links to known fraudsters. It's not a business. It's a scam. You weren't investing. You were about to be fleeced." She didn't stop there. She laid another document next to it. "This is your credit card statement showing over $60,000 in debt for luxury goods and 5-star hotels." Another paper. "This is the record of the second mortgage on your home, showing you have drained every last cent of equity from it." She continued laying out each piece of their disastrous financial life like a coroner laying out organs on an autopsy table. "You came to your father not with a business plan but with a bailout plea. You tried to solve your debt crisis, a crisis created by your own reckless spending, by tricking a grieving man into giving you $2 million to throw into a fraudulent scheme. Do you really want to stand up in a courtroom and have a judge listen to that story, Andre?" They were silent. The rage had evaporated, replaced by the pale, sickly look of absolute shock. They stared at the papers, at the undeniable, brutal truth of their lives laid bare. They had been so focused on their own narrative of victimhood that they never imagined we had the full schematic of their desperation. And now it was my turn to speak. I stepped forward, my voice low and heavy, filled with the weight of every disappointment, every sorrow of the past few weeks. "You didn't come to your mother's funeral," I began, and Andre flinched as if I had struck him. "You were on a yacht celebrating. While I was burying the love of my life, my partner of 50 years, my son was drinking champagne. I received your text message while I was sitting in the church staring at her casket. Did you even think about her for 1 second that day, or was she just an inconvenience that conflicted with a party?" I picked up the crumpled contract from the floor. "And then you came here. Not to comfort me, but to ask for this. You wanted to sell her favorite place on earth, the house where I taught you how to skip a stone across the water, the porch where she bandaged your knee when you fell off your bike. You were going to sell those memories, her memories, to pay for her. I glanced at Brittany, whose face was now a mask of pale terror. Expensive tastes. You stood in this house surrounded by your mother's things, and you lied to my face. I took a step closer, my eyes locked on my son's. You talk about legacy. You talk about inheritance. Let me tell you what a legacy is. It's not the money in a bank account. It's the honor of a family name. It's the respect you show for those who came before you. It's the integrity with which you live your life. It's everything you and I built Amara. And it's everything you were willing to throw away for a new car and a vacation. I let the contract fall from my fingers. It fluttered to the floor, a worthless piece of paper. The house is no longer yours, I said, my voice final. By attempting to violate the terms of the gift, you forfeited your claim. Your signature made it so. The ownership has already reverted to the trust. And that house will now serve its true purpose. I continued, delivering the final crushing blow. I am donating it in its entirety to a charitable foundation in your mother's name. It will be converted into a retreat, a sanctuary for families dealing with long-term illness, a place where they can find the peace and comfort that you denied your own mother in her final years. Her legacy will be one of compassion and generosity. That is how she will be remembered. Andre finally collapsed into a chair, his face in his hands, a broken man. Brittany stood frozen, speechless. As for your inheritance, I said, looking down at my son, don't worry, it's still there. Exactly where your mother wanted it to be, locked away in a trust for your children, the grandchildren she never got to meet. Protected, safe, from you. They left without another word. The fury had been extinguished, replaced by the cold gray ash of utter defeat. Andre shuffled out of the house like a man twice his age, his shoulders slumped, his eyes vacant. Brittany followed, but not with him. She walked a few feet apart, a chasm of silent contempt separating them. She didn't look at him. She didn't look at me. She just stared straight ahead, her face a hard, frozen mask. I watched them get into their car through the living room window. There was no shouting, no argument. The fight was over. All that was left was the wreckage. I imagined the drive home would be the quietest they had ever shared, a toxic silence thick with unspoken accusations. Their entire relationship, a partnership built on the shared ambition of living a life they hadn't earned, had been a performance, and the show had just been canceled. The money was gone, the dream was dead, and all they had left was each other and the mountain of debt they had created together. I knew with a certainty that brought me no joy that their marriage was now just another one of their bad investments spiraling toward bankruptcy. After the door closed, the house was quieter than ever. But the oppressive silence of grief had been replaced by a clean, quiet peace. Nina had left shortly after them, giving my arm a supportive squeeze before she went. I was alone with the ghosts and the memories. I didn't feel triumphant. There was no satisfaction in seeing my son so utterly broken. There was only a profound, aching sadness for the man he could have been, for the relationship we might have had. I walked over to the mantelpiece and picked up my favorite photograph of Amara. It was from our trip to the Grand Canyon the year before she got sick. She was laughing, her face tilted up toward the sun, her eyes full of life and joy. "I did it, my love," I whispered to the picture. "I did what you would have wanted. I protected our legacy. I protected our future grandchildren. I just wish it didn't have to hurt so much." I felt the familiar sting of tears behind my eyes, but this time it was different. It wasn't the helpless grief of loss. It was the bittersweet sorrow of a difficult duty fulfilled. I had done the hardest thing a father can do. I had let my son face the consequences of his own choices. I hadn't acted out of anger or revenge. I had acted out of love, a tough, painful, necessary love, the kind of love that honors a legacy. And in that moment, I felt a sense of peace settle over me, a peace I hadn't felt since before she got sick. The house was in order. The future was secure. Amara's memory had been honored. 3 months passed. The seasons began to change. I started the foundation in Amara's name, and the first families were scheduled to visit the newly named Amara's Sanctuary at Silver Lake in the spring. I found a new rhythm to my life, a quiet routine built around managing the foundation and tending to the garden she had loved so much. I didn't hear from Andre. I didn't expect to. The wound was too deep, the shame too great.
Then one Tuesday afternoon, while sorting through the mail, I found a plain, unassuming envelope with no return address. My name and address were handwritten in a familiar, slightly messy script. It was from Andre. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. Inside there was no letter, no long explanation or apology, just a personal check. It wasn't for a large amount, just $500. Tucked into the fold of the check was a small, torn piece of notebook paper. On it were 3 simple words written in that same script: the first payment. I stood there in my hallway, holding the check and the note. It was so little against the mountain of what was owed both financially and emotionally. It was nothing, and yet it was everything. It was a single drop of rain after a long and brutal drought. It was the first faltering step on a long road toward accountability. It was a flicker of the son I once knew, and as I looked at his familiar handwriting for the first time since Amara died, a genuine, unburdened smile touched my lips. The story wasn't over. There might be a new chapter yet to be written, and that was enough. This ordeal taught me that a true inheritance isn't a sum of money passed down, but a set of values lived out. I learned that protecting your family sometimes means protecting them from their own worst impulses. It's a painful lesson for a father to learn that sometimes the greatest act of love isn't giving your children what they want, but giving them what they need: accountability. A legacy isn't secured with legal documents alone, but with the courage to defend the principles upon which that legacy was built, even if it means breaking your own heart to do so. Was I too harsh, or was this the only way for my son to learn? I would love to read your thoughts in the comments below. Please like this video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next story.